If you listen to one of the last podcasts that I put out, I was mentioning that I was just coming back from, or maybe even going to Ohio to do a video shoot for an interior design friend. So today I wanted to show you how I kind of get started on that, and then I'll just kind of how I work through the process. And I'll probably update the video as I work on it just to show you some of the progress, but I haven't decided yet. I will at least show you how I assemble things and how I color things and things of that nature. So first, let me just tee up what we're doing here. So my designer friend's name is Mary. Her interior design business is Merrily Modern. Mary and I used to shoot weddings in the same kind of community back since 2007. So that's how I got to know her. We became good friends over the years. She actually was slowing down with weddings and trying to find a way out. And I taught her real estate photography. And this was back, 2018-ish, 2017. And this is something I didn't talk about yet in the Open Book Club. But at one point in time, I was actually going to franchise out my business. That's the video for another time, or a podcast even. But she actually started Toledo Home Tours, which was basically a branch off of my Minnesota Home Tours. And we had it set up to where I was basically consulting her, and, I basically gave her the business in basically a box, and I was a consultant along the way, and I made a percentage of whatever she shot. So a few years back, well, for a while now, they've been flipping houses. Specifically, they started out just a modest home in one of the suburbs in Ohio, or in Toledo, and then they purchased a mid-century modern home probably 7 years ago, I think. And they've been renovating it ever since while they're living in it. And one of the big projects that she's been focusing on is her kitchen. This kitchen was kind of one of the last big projects they were going to do as they were going through the rest of the house. And I believe she started the actual construction process about 11 months ago, and then supply chain issues caused a ton of delays. And she's been updating her Instagram followers on a lot of the things that she's done in her kitchen, because it's a very unique design, kind of quirky, modern, fun, lots of energy. And it's not something you normally see in kitchens these days. So very unique kitchen. Mary has a very unique personality. Good, again, very fun, good friend. Follow her on Instagram. You can check out her website as well. But let me go ahead and hop in here. So earlier this year, I photographed this kitchen for her. Actually, it was almost a whole house renovation. She did the kitchen here. That's our friend Noelle. She was the stylist. Noelle actually was my wife and I's wedding photographer. She's a good friend as well. But now she's a stylist, and she does a remarkable job. But yeah, these photos turned out great. It was a great licensing opportunity as well. And then, of course, make sure you follow Mary's Instagram. She has a pretty fun channel. She's fairly entertaining. If she does say so herself. So the first thing I did was we met up, and I went to her house, and we just talked for about an hour about her kitchen, talked about what the interview would be like, because I wanted to interview her and have her on camera and light her up and all those things in the environment that we were going to be talking about. And the primary focus of the video wasn't going to be the entire house, because it's still a work in progress, but mostly the kitchen itself. So I wanted to have the kitchen in the background. We talked about the different elements that were important in the kitchen. I mean, they all are, but like what things that... So I've been doing video for a long time, and over time I've kind of developed a system. And the way I work with video is I work in threes. So I generally have, if it's a story or a narrative, there's always 3 topics or 3 main points, or a beginning, storyline, and an end. There has to be 3 parts to it so that it gives it some structure and some consistency. What I see a lot of people doing is they'll just interview people, and they'll put the things that they think are cool in there, and the video ends up being super long and it's drawn out, but there's no defining like conclusion to, or there's no narrative or anything that's kind of keeping the viewer engaged. Because as a video is going along, there has to be, like every 15 to 20 seconds or so, there has to be something that catches your attention, whether it's through the words that are being said or the visuals. There has to be something that kind of indicates that there's more coming. So you have to kind of pull the viewer along through the video. if it's not visually interesting. I mean, if it's visually interesting, they're going to watch it. If it sounds good, they're going to watch it. But to keep them engaged in the actual story and make them want to watch it again. So we identified like the three kind of main topics we wanted to talk about, but it was still kind of scattered because there was so much to talk about with this kitchen that we just couldn't narrow it down to 3 points. So again, I went over there. We chatted for about an hour or so. I took some notes, took some reference photos just to kind of wrap my head around it, and I basically did like a mini scout. And I more or less pre-visualized the entire shoot in my head. I knew exactly how I was going to set her up, how I was going to light her. I knew exactly kind of what the light was going to look like. I had the visuals of the video all planned out in my head ahead of time. It's not complicated. It's very simple. So once I got to the house, I immediately started getting set up with my camera where I knew I was going to be setting her up. I like to allow myself about an hour of actual setup time so I can dial things in. But in reality, I want to try to get things done in a half hour because that will give me a half hour to refine things. So when you're bidding on these types of videos or anything like that, buffer at least an hour in of setup time to your actual shoot day, okay? So, but aim to get things ready to go in 30 minutes. It's better to start early than to let this go on forever, all right? Okay, so as you can see, I had two different angles that I set up. They're both poorly exposed. I'll explain that in a second. This first angle is straight on. I wanted to make the background the kitchen, and I want it to be fairly dominant because that is the subject, but I wanted to have Mary in the foreground of that, just to kind of put her in the environment and give you a sense of scale. And then the second angle is more just for, well, one, it's always good to have a second angle to cut to, but two, it's more visually interesting. The reason you might want to cut to an angle is to hide different cuts in the clip, or if you just need to, like I said, every 15 to 20 seconds, you need to change things up, and you want to have 15, 20 seconds is actually very long. I would say every few seconds, maybe 5 to 10 at the most, you want to have something change that keeps people's interest on the video. So having a close-up, a tighter shot is always good. The other thing I would suggest doing that I found over the years is you don't want to have the second angle more than 45 degrees difference from the first angle. So if you look at this, this first angle is basically at a 90 degree, and this is about 35-ish, maybe 45, but this is pretty much the edge of where I would push it. A lot of the times you'll see people, they have these extreme angles, and it's not that it's always bad, but it's somewhat jarring sometimes and too much of a difference if you've got, and I don't have any examples to show you, unfortunately, but you just trust me, you just want to keep the second camera no more than probably 45 degrees. That's probably the limit you want to push yourself when you're putting in a tight shot. Anyway, the reason these are also poorly exposed is because one, I didn't want to blow out the skylights up here and the windows. So I underexposed this one and I overexposed this one because I wanted to make sure that one, since she's wearing a black shirt, and this is black up here and this is black right here, I didn't want to make those too dark because the highlights to these windows aren't that important to me for this shot because I'm going to be cropping in, as you'll see. But I didn't want these being too dark because I knew ahead of time my camera's limitations. I know if it was too dark, I would be introducing noise as I brought the exposure up. So I wanted to overexpose so that these details. So again, it's important to know your camera's limitations and plan for those things ahead of time. Now, as far as the color, you'll notice the white balance is off. I shoot with Blackmagic cameras, so I can correct the white balance after the fact very easily because it shoots in RAW. So now to show you what the final clips looked like after I've color graded them and corrected the verticals and horizontals, which is important thing. So here's the main and here's the secondary. So as you can see, I color matched them pretty easily. I'm not going to do a full tutorial in color matching today, but just wanted to kind of show you the difference. So what this looks like.
Trying to keep its original modern vibe present. So the first thing that we did when we bought the,
you can see it's not super subtle, but I've really pushed it to where it's like it's not a super jarring cut. But if I would have went any more extreme, it just would have been way too much. I pushed it as far to the left as I could. As far as sound, I actually had two mics. I had her mic'd up on two different mics. I had a DJI wireless mic, and I also had my Rode wireless. I had my Rode wireless lav mics. I can't remember what the thing is or what the model is, but I wanted to have two options because I was just testing out these DJI mics and I wanted to see how good the quality was. But it's always good to have a backup with audio, especially when the interview is going to be a driving force in your video. It's best to have two audio sources. If you don't have two lav mics or two wireless mics, you can even just set an iPhone nearby that's like out of the picture. Like in this case, I would have set an iPhone like on the other side of her legs, perhaps if I needed to do that because she was hiding that area, and I could have recovered some of that audio. Or you could even put a shotgun mic on the top of your camera or somewhere near them. But point being, you always want to have a second camera. I didn't put an overhead mic because I wanted to have all this headroom above her head, and that boom mic would have come into frame. And two, it would have picked up, even though it's a directional mic and it would have been pointed directly towards her mouth, it still would have picked up a lot of, this room is very reverby. There's a lot of echo in there, and that would have been kind of a nightmare to deal with. And you can even hear the reverb a little bit in the audio for this, but I was at least able to control it a little bit more with the loud mic, and you can go ahead and listen here.
so over the past 7 years, we've been working towards restoring it. And
so you can see there's not a lot of lingering reverb happening, and that's because I opted to use a DJI mic. Okay, as far as composition, I pretty much use the same compositional elements that you would use in photography, right? Rule of thirds, symmetry, leading lines, all those things. You don't want it to be, don't try to get all artsy fartsy and fancy with video. Like, stick to the fundamentals, frame it up just like you would be taking a photo, and stick with that. You can correct some things later. And by the way, it's better to shoot wider than it is to shoot tighter. As you can see, I cropped in a bit from the original because I wanted to have that room to play with that. Plus, I wanted to be able to rotate and crop. Same with this one. I wanted to have room to play, so I shot this one fairly wide. Actually, I ended up going a little bit wider when we actually shot, but yeah, as you can see, I wanted to have some room to play with that. Oh, the other thing I did, I forgot to mention what lens I used on this main camera. So I actually used my 24-7 or my 24 millimeter tilt shift lens on this main clip right here. And the reason I did that was because if I were just using a 24 millimeter lens or anything straight on, it would not have given, and it's the same reason you would use a tilt shift lens in the first place. I wanted to elevate the camera as high as I could and then shift the lens down so that I could see this island more. I don't have any clips of what it looked like before I threw the tilt shift lens on there, but when I had just a regular, I think I started with the 18 to 35 millimeter lens on here, and the problem is when you're shooting at the appropriate angle for the interviewee, you couldn't see the counter space. Like, it was just like flat. It just, same reason you would use a tilt shift lens. So I threw a tilt shift lens on here and used that. If you've never shot people before, a good rule of thumb is to have the camera above eye level, like somewhat tilting down towards them, because it's just more flattering angle. She doesn't have a double chin or anything, but you don't want to be shooting up at them. You want to be shooting very slightly down with them. You want the camera being at, face level, but aim for like the eyes of the forehead and shoot down a little bit. Same with this angle here. This one was actually facing up a little bit. I probably could have lowered it. As you can see, though, she doesn't have a double chin, so it wasn't. She has a good jawline, so it wasn't too bad, but it probably would have been a little bit more flattering had I shot down toward her. So anyway, those things in mind. The next thing I kind of want to talk about is directing people. So you don't want to necessarily give them a list of questions to prepare for, because they're going to write a script and they're going to try to script it. It's just going to come off as inauthentic. So I would highly suggest not giving them the questions ahead of time. I would suggest giving them some guidelines on the things you might be talking about. You also want to understand the purpose of the video. Is it for your portfolio? Is it for their portfolio? Is it for a promo video? Like, what is the intention of the video? The intention of this video was for me, to be honest with you, to have a portfolio piece, but I wanted her to be able to use this as a promotional video for herself, one that she could send to clients and she could kind of explain her thought process and her design process. So I knew in my head that obviously we were going to be talking about the kitchen. That was the main subject, but I want to understand, one, what led up to getting the kitchen, to doing the kitchen. So we're going to talk a little bit about her house in general and all the projects that they've done there. And I also want to understand how she thought about it. One of the things I mentioned earlier was that her kitchen design is very unique, as you can see. I mean, not many people are using these colors, like this light blue tile, this wallpaper, this yellow tile. It's kind of a funky design compared to like what's popular right now with the white kitchens and everything. I really wanted to capture her thought process and why she thinks about the things that she thinks about. Like, how does she come to these decisions? So those are the three things that I wanted to cover. Her experience renovating and what led to the kitchen, her thought process, and talking about the kitchen elements themselves. Those are the three things that I wanted to cover. Again, work in threes, find three different things. If we were just doing a story on her, talking about her, I would have picked like her background as a photographer and what led her to doing interior design. I would have had her talk about her family, and I would have had her talk about like the future or something like that. So again, three things, pick three things, stick to them. So when it comes to actually interviewing your clients, you don't want to give them questions ahead of time that they are going to answer, because the reason for that is they're going to rehearse them, they're going to come up with scripts. It's going to be very inauthentic, and it's going to come off as somewhat robotic and uninteresting. Instead, give them some guidelines on the things that you will be talking about, and you have to go into the interview knowing ahead of time what information you want to get out of it. And this is going to be incredibly boring, but valuable to you guys, I think. I'm going to include the full 60-minute interview, unedited, just so you can listen to how I interacted with her throughout the entire thing, how I'm asking her questions, how I'm trying to get information out of her. Again, as I'm interviewing her, I'm listening for those three things, and I'm trying to get three different stories out of her as it relates to those three topics I want to cover. And also, as I'm asking her these questions, I don't want her to just tell the stories. I'm also listening for quotable moments, like things that she says that you can create as a snippet or something, or things that you would use as your transition points in the video. You're kind of editing the video in your head as you're listening. So it's a complicated process. It's not complicated. It's a complicated process to explain, and it does take some practice doing it on location. But you're kind of editing in your head as you're doing the interview. So as I'm interviewing her, I'm asking her about her past and what's leading up to this kitchen renovation, and she's giving me answers. But I'm trying to listen for key things that I know that I'm going to be able to use in the video. Sometimes the way your clients talk isn't super interesting, so you have to dig interesting things out of them in order to, and once you hear it, you'll know it. But just, you want to listen for phrases or quotable moments within the video that you can for sure include in there. If you decide, for whatever reason, to listen to the full unedited interview, you'll better understand, it'll give you a better sense of what it was like to be actually on location listening to that. You can download that video in the description, by the way. Now, for me, it's important to, like I said, you do the scout, you do the interview. It's important to do the interview before you start filming B-roll, if at all possible. Sometimes the schedule's not going to allow for it, and you have to start filming B-roll ahead of time. That's fine if you go into it knowing kind of what you're going to be talking about. I knew in this video we were going to be talking about the kitchen, so I knew that I could go ahead and get B-roll of the kitchen before we actually interviewed. However, I did not do that. I interviewed her first. Now, the reason you would want to interview first is because, again, you're taking, as she's talking or as your client's talking, they're going to be mentioning key things, and you can take either a physical or a mental note of those things that they mention, and you can create visuals, B-roll, on those particular topics. So, for instance, there was one point in the interview where she was talking about these tiles that are on the wall and how they tied in with, and you can't see it from this angle, but how they tied in with the original tile that was part of the original house. Like, that was important to her. She also talked about how having working in threes as a designer as well is important, like using a certain color or tone in 3 different places. Like she talked about the black. There's black tile here, black wallpaper here, and these black sound things here. She works in threes as well. So I wanted to make sure that I'm listening for those things so that I have kind of a shot list that she's building for me. And then all I have to do after the fact is go through, get the B-roll of that shot list that she created, and it's just a matter of finding the right compositions. I'll show you some of those in just a minute here. So that's all as far as the interview is concerned in a nutshell. I know that was a lot of information, and this is not a full course, obviously. I'm just kind of giving you a primer on how I handle this. Now, once the interview is all done, you pack all that stuff, you get it all out of the way, you have the space staged or basically photo ready, and then you're going to go through and start shooting some B-roll. So in my case, I actually did about 90% of my shots on a slider. I wanted to have precision in the movements, so I wanted to be able to use tilt shift lenses and I didn't want to do too much post-production to correct things, so I wanted to have full control. You can do that with a gimbal, it's just there's a lot more post-production work, and to be honest with you, my arms would have been killing me. I'm not going to go through the entire thought process behind B-roll, but I'm just going to show you, I'm going to let this play for a minute and show you a few of the B-rolls that I have assembled. So as you can see, very slow. I shot these at 48 frames per second. Long story, you can do that on Blackmagic. When I edit these, it's going to have much less movement in most of the clips, but I shot them fast enough to where I have some control. So this is the part where I said she wants to tie the original tile into the new tile. I wanted to make sure I got a transition shot that kind of showed that. So as you're watching these, you haven't heard the interview, but I'm sure you can imagine what things she might be talking about on how I can utilize this B-roll over the things that she's mentioning. So I know she talked about the skylights. The skylights were very important to her. Again, so I'm not going to share all of this B-roll. I mean, I'll skim through it really quick, but you can kind of get a sense. This shot list was based off of everything that we talked about, and then some other things that I may have noticed along the way that I just wanted to get just in case, because I had maybe an idea for it. I did get some shots with drone at the beginning because I knew at the beginning of the interview I was going to have it start with her talking about her house and the process that they went through when leading up to the kitchen design. Now, as far as assembly goes, this is the tricky part. So you can see I've got some tabs open here. I've got some outtakes because we wanted to have an outtake reel. This is the interview assembly. I've got it set up as a multicam clip, which multicam is essentially you can combine 2 camera clips as one clip, and then you can hit buttons 1 or 2 and it'll switch between the cameras fairly easy. Then I've got a B-roll assembly, and then I've got an actual edit timeline. So the B-roll assembly, well, the multicam assembly is basically just every clip that we did trimmed up, and I took all the crap out of there that we're not going to use. So I brought it from a 60-minute interview down to a 20-minute interview because I knew 40 minutes of that interview was not going to be used and it was just going to get in my way. B-roll assembly, this is basically all of the clips, same thing. I trimmed them all up into, instead of, a lot of times when I film my B-roll, I'll go back and forth a few times. just to find the right angle. These are all just trimmed down into like one direction, best compositions, etc. And then I've got my edit timeline. Now, as far as doing the actual timeline assembly, once I get the interview assembly ready to go, I'll export the audio only and I'm going to upload it to rev.com. When I upload it to rev.com, I can get the whole entire interview transcribed and I can actually look at the interview's words, and it'll also give me the timestamps on when those words are said. I can read through it and I can look for the story in the words, so I'm not like shifting through footage. This is a secret that I'm going to take credit for because I've never heard of anybody else doing this, but I've been doing this for years and it has saved me significant time and has really helped me when it comes to storytelling. It's also a nice method to find those quotable moments that I was talking about. Sometimes it looks better in writing than it does on the actual visual, so keep that in mind. But I'm able to take all this information and break it down into a story type format. So as you can see, I just copy all the different things that I thought were relevant, and I'm assembling the story over here. So I'm basically editing the video, or assembling the video rather, the structure of the video on paper before I even go into start assembling the video. So as you can see, I took something that she said towards the end of the interview, 20 minutes into the interview. Most people think that when they're working with an interior designer that they're going to design it, blah, 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 blah. And then I took a snippet from 1 minute and 15 seconds, and then I went back to 17 minutes, 21 seconds. So as you can see, I've already got half of the story assembled already. So all I have to do is go through and look through this interview and find the different pieces that I think would best fit. Once I have all that information, I'm going to take it all back into Resolve, and I'm going to start slowly assembling those clips in that order, and then I'm going to watch it. Now, this is as far as I got before I started thinking that maybe I should document this process for you guys. I do think this is going to be one of the more valuable videos. But now, once I have all of these assembled in order, I can go through and I can just listen to it, and I won't do any editing. I'll just sit back and I'll listen to it a few times, make sure that the story makes sense. And as I'm listening to the story, I can start to visualize the different visuals that might be happening. And the way that I work with that is I'll listen to it a few times and I'll start getting pictures in my head. And then I do something like this. I'll let the video play.
Most people think that when they're working with an interior designer that they are going to design it without any input from them.
So I'm listening to what she's saying, and I'm going to, if I click on the actual timeline itself, not on the clip, if I click on the timeline, I can hit the letter M to add a marker to that particular spot. And what I'm going to do is every time a visual pops in my head of whatever she's talking about, again, by this time I've listened to the whole thing 3 or 4 times, and I have a good sense of what's going on. I've already got pictures in my head. So I will go through and I will mark every time she says something.
Most people think
that triggers a visual.
I think that when they're working with an interior designer that they are going to design it without any input from them or just present them ideas.
Like right here, I'm not picturing any visuals happening. I'm picturing this being just her talking, like none of the B-roll that I got pops into my head.
When the biggest goal is to have it feel like a collaboration. So like right here, a visual popped in my head of her working with a client. I don't have any B-roll of that, but if I were working with an interior designer, I would know that right there is a good spot to inject a clip of her collaborating with a client, or maybe drawing on her computer, or doing something that is a visual that supports the words that she's saying right there. And then from there, what I'd do is I'd hold down Option and I drag this marker out for the length of that clip. So this is how long I would want that B-roll clip to go. Collaboration. So if you
can move this over if I need to.
Is to have it feel like a collaboration. So if you have an idea, I might let you know why that might not be the best decision.
Okay, so I might have 2 or 3 different B-roll clips that go right there. And before you know it, you've got a video and you haven't even started editing the thing yet. You've only assembled things and prepared things. And by going this route, it significantly saves you tons of time. I've made a lot of different promotional type videos, and this is the structure that has worked best for me over time. I think oftentimes when photographers start doing video, and by the way, I started out as a video producer, so I started doing video before I did photos, and storytelling was always kind of a big part of it for me. And I think as photographers, a lot of times we are so focused on the visuals that we don't consider the storyline the storyline will prompt what visuals need to happen, and the visuals, all they do is they help enhance the story. So think of it as story first versus a video first versus a visual thing first. So that's why I do most of my editing by listening and then by envisioning what I think might go over that particular spot. Before you know it, you're going to have a timeline that looks kind of like this, but it's going to be a lot longer. You're going to have markers up here. You're going to have different things, and you're going to have a really solid skeleton to get started with. Now from there, all you do is just go through, you can find the B-roll, and you already know what kind of B-roll you have because you've gone through and you've made this assembly. You have a really good sense of what your B-roll options are. And here I've got a lot of B-roll footage. I'm not going to use all of this, but I've got so much to support the story that we talked about, right? You can also see here why it's important to do the interview first, because that's going to inform what B-roll clips you're going to make. Again, I use that example if she was talking about collaborating with a client. If I want to use that part of the story, I want to have some kind of footage that would support the visual or enhance the story of her talking about working with a client. All right, so from here, I hope this was helpful in getting you started on getting your mind wrapped around how to do these types of videos. I'm going to continue editing this. I'm going to put a part 2 out that will show my progress from this point to the next point. And then I'll probably make a third video that shows the finalization process and how I do all that. So I'm guessing this is going to end up being a 3-part series. But this is probably going to take me a week or so to work on because I've got a lot on my plate right now. We're getting ready to move. I've got some shoots coming up. That's another video. And it's just going to be a busy few weeks. So this will probably be a few week long process, but hopefully in the meantime, this gives you something to walk away with that you find valuable, that you can start, maybe the gears will get moving in your head for the next video you want to put out. Now, this doesn't have to be limited to just interior designers or architects. This can be with your realtor clients as well. A lot of times they think the go-to thing right now for realtors is to do a walkthrough about a house, but you rarely see many promotional videos about realtors themselves or their process or anything like that. Same principles would apply to that. If you want to expand outside of real estate and you want to just start making some extra money doing promotional videos on the side, this structure and this format works as well for all of that. And you can make thousands of dollars on these videos. These videos, when people are involved, they start at $2,000 for me. I can't do these for less than $2,000. It's a full day's shooting, and that's probably even undercharging, to be honest with you. Videos like this are more time consuming than doing an actual photo shoot, so I should be making at the very least double what I'm doing on a photo shoot. So in a perfect world, I'd be charging $4,000 or $5,000 for these things, and it's hopefully going to get that way soon. But right now, it's a minimum of $2,000 to do a basic video like this. So something to think about. Let me know if you have any questions on this specific video, and again, or if there's anything you want me to cover that I didn't cover on this. I'm happy to put it in the comments or make it on the next video. But yeah, let me know if you need anything from this video. In the meantime, I'll come out with a second video, hopefully in a few weeks. Thanks for watching.